A couple of things to think about this week for Chapter 2 in property is to keep in mind that you really want to look at the adverse possession in water rights matters. Adverse possession gets a lot of different terms. Some people say it's stealing property and so on and so forth. But really what adverse possession does is allows unused property to eventually end up in somebody else's name. So, in Florida, after 7 years, you can obtain ownership of property if you can show that you have been maintaining that property as your own, and at least in Florida, you have to pay the property taxes. So what do you have to have? Well, one is you have to meet that statutory requirement. So I said it's 7 years, you have to be using that property for 7 years. Another thing that you have to think about is the property has to be open and notorious. And the open and notorious part of that basically means that you're basically using it out in the open. You're not trying to secretly use the property. So if there was a house that was abandoned and you move in and start living there, that's open and notorious because you're actually using that property. Actual and exclusive possession, you have to be using it and you have to continue to use it. You can't sort of spotty, oh, I'm going to be in this house for a couple of days and I'm gone for 6 months and I come back and I'm claiming now that I could have this property because I've used it for 7 years. No, the 7 years have to be continuous actual use. It has to be a hostile possession. You have to be using the property in such a way that it's to the detriment of the owner. So let's say that you have property back to back with someone and you put a pool in your backyard, but your pool is so big that it goes beyond the property line. Well, if you continue to use that property, after 7 years, you could claim, well, you know what? I thought this is where the property line was. I didn't realize my pool is now encroaching on your property, and therefore, I do believe that I should be able to obtain your property, where my pool is, by adverse possession. So that's one of the reasons for it. Another reason is, if you think about this country, it's very large. Lots and lots and lots of land. Well, if somebody truly just forgets they have property, or they abandon their property, we want somebody else to be able to take possession of it because we can start taxing people who use it and it's being used instead of just sitting there abandoned. The next thing I want to discuss quickly is water rights. Water rights are extremely important. I know we're in Florida, so it's not as big a deal perhaps, but in some parts of the world, especially in parts of the country, it is very important. And even in Florida, it's very important if you think about the fact that what happens to water on property? So I'm at Hodges University. When it rains, all the water from rain is going to go somewhere. It has to stay either within our property or be funneled out into a proper channel. So I can't just have all of my water run off the property onto the neighbor who's just a little bit lower elevation, and every time it rains, think, well, I don't have to worry about it. It's on your property now. That I can't do. Instead, what I really have to do is make sure I contain all that water, which is why we have a lot of holding ponds. A lot of holding ponds on property, so that way as it rains, the water is collected on my own property. I can't just let it go off onto somebody else's. Or it goes into a proper channel. So think about that. Riparian, the word you don't use very often, riparian water use just has to do with what happens when your property is up against a lake, a river, stream, something like that. So you have property on water. What are your rights? So make sure you use that. As well as the natural flow theory and reasonable use. Because you want to make sure that if you're using water out of a river or stream for irrigation, are you using an appropriate amount, or are you taking so much that everybody downriver doesn't have water anymore because you're taking more than your share? So those are things to think about. Waste basically just means that the property is somehow, usually means going to be declining of some sort. So there are different types of waste, and sometimes even waste can be a good thing, but read up on waste in Chapter 2 and you'll know a little bit more about it. All right, so that's what I have for you for Week 2 and Chapter 2. Hope you have a good week.